Get up on what's trending.
Get up!
You're listening to the Front Page Report on HBCU Pulse Radio.
After months of deliberation, the Supreme Court has ruled against the Biden administration's student debt relief program. On Friday, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that President Biden, via the powers granted to the Secretary of Education in the 2003 HEROES Act, doesn't have the authority to forgive student loan relief via his plan, and a plan of that sort has to be approved by Congress. The Biden administration announced in August 2022 that his administration would cancel $10,000 in federal student loan debt for borrowers that make less than $125,000 or households that make less than $250,000 per year. The loan forgiveness would have totaled over $400 billion. President Biden, in his August 25th press conference, also announced that Pell Grant recipients would have received $20,000 in forgiveness. And we reported on HBCUPulse.com that $20,000 in forgiveness per Pell Grant recipients would have overwhelmingly affected HBCU students, as UNCF reports that over 70% of HBCU students are Pell Grant eligible, with Black students making up to 72% of Pell Grant recipients amongst all colleges. A press release published in January by the Biden administration presented data showing that 26 million people in all 50 states applied or were eligible for relief under the plan. Now, when the plan was announced, the move drew significant conservative opposition and several legal challenges, and those legal challenges made it where it was two cases that rose up to the Supreme Court. Now, the Biden administration argued that the student loan forgiveness program was authorized by the 2003 HEROES Act, which allowed the Secretary of Education to waive and modify loans in the case of a national emergency. And the Biden administration argued that COVID-19 was a national emergency, and that national emergency provision, President Biden ended it in May 2023. However, the argument was that with everything that was happening with COVID-19 and the economic uncertainty for a lot of families and borrowers, that the Secretary of Education could use the 2003 HEROES Act to give up to $20,000 in loan forgiveness. So Republican detractors argue that the federal government didn't have the power for unilateral federal student loan relief. And like I said, it was two specific cases, Biden v. Nebraska and U.S. Department of Education v. Brown, were heard by the Supreme Court in late February. Biden v. Nebraska was filed by 6 conservative-led states who argued that the student debt relief program would hurt tax revenue for their state, as well as student loan company Mohila. Now, Mohila denied involvement in the case, but they were still used to justify the ruling. Now, the U.S. Department of Education v. Brown was filed by 2 student loan borrowers who didn't qualify for the relief under the Biden student debt relief plan. The issue of if the plaintiffs had legal standing to file both lawsuits were brought up during oral arguments. The liberal justices, as well as conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett, heavily scrutinized standing by plaintiffs in both cases, especially in Biden v. Nebraska invoking Mohila. So the folks that were suing the Biden administration needed to prove that the policy of the student debt relief would injure them and that the relief would address said injuries. The plaintiffs in U.S. Department of Education v. Brown needed to prove that the student debt relief policy would injure them and the relief would address said injuries. Now, the Supreme Court eventually ruled in that case on Friday due to them not providing significant proof that they would have been injured by the student debt relief. But the Supreme Court found that in the Biden v. Nebraska case, that Missouri had standing. Now, mind you, they said Missouri had standing, but not the other states listed in the case. And ultimately, because of that, they struck down the loan forgiveness program. The conservative justice ruled ultimately that Mohila would suffer injuries due to the loan forgiveness program, although once again, I must say that Mohila denied involvement in the case. After the ruling, President Biden held a press conference at the White House with Education Secretary Miguel Cardona about what the next steps are in student debt relief.
First, I'm announcing today a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible. We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act. That will allow Secretary Cardona, who's with me today, to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief.
President Biden also laid out actions that the administration is taking to relieve the financial stress around federal repayment, which resumes in October.
We're creating a temporary 12-month, what we're calling on-ramp repayment program. Monthly payments will be due. Bills will not go out and interest will be accruing. And during this period, if you can pay your monthly bills, you should. But if you cannot, if you miss payments, this on-ramp will temporarily remove the threat of default. or having your credit harmed, which can hurt borrowers for years to come.
The president also announced that modifications will be made to the repay plan, also known as the revised pay-as-you-earn plan, such as reducing the amount that borrowers have to make on their monthly payments by half, from 10% of their discretionary income to 5%. So in conclusion, although the Supreme Court ruled against the Biden student debt relief plan that he announced in August 2022, provisions are being made by the Biden administration, led by Secretary Miguel Cardona, to put in place a new student debt relief program that's essentially powered by the Higher Education Act of 1965. To learn about everything that went on with this Supreme Court ruling, as well as what's to come for the Biden administration, head over to HBCUPulse.com and also go to federalstudentaid.gov so you can learn more from the administration about what's going on, how you can apply, and what needs to be done.
Like what you hear?
Yeah.
Subscribe to HBCU Pulse Radio on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, head to HBCUPulse.com to stay up to date on what's going on in the HBCU community. Thank you for listening to HBCU Pulse Radio.